getting ready to kick off here. Andy, how do we turn off the doorbell? I was trying to I was trying to figure it out. It's so obnoxious.
Let's see. Can you make me a co-host?
Yeah. Help. Quick. So many doorbells.
All right, there we go.
Beautiful. Thanks. All right, guys. So you are all on time. Thank you for hopping in right at the top of the hour here. So before we get started, a few of you I just mentioned this, but we actually had a last-minute cancellation from our guest speaker, which is unfortunate because it was going to be such a great presentation. But we've decided we're going to kick the presentation that he had planned down the road, so it will still happen. And in the meantime, Andy and I threw together a few notes and a few activities that effectively got us going as developers and designers in the XR space. So at the very least, you guys will have a few new resources that you can check out. But we're also going to treat today as, for the most part, a big networking event. So we're going to lean on virtual breakout rooms so we can really get to know each other and meet some new people. So with all that said, let's go ahead and dive in. The theme today still, despite the abrupt change, is still going to be how to get a job in AR and VR, or really how to get started in XR. So we'll talk about our general process, and then we're going to dive into building relevant skills. So which skill sets are most relevant today in today's pipeline, today's workflow, as Unity continues to evolve so quickly and some of the other 3D engines continue to evolve so quickly. And now that XR design tools are so common in the pipeline. So we'll talk about the leaders in the pack there. And then we're going to finish up with a little bit around how to build an XR application. We don't have the insights from my XR Jobs, that is, who's going to give the original presentation. But with that said, our biggest friction point when we got started was around that process of how to build an XR application. So less about how to actually learn the skills, but more how to apply them, where to fit into the workflow. So that's why we're going to hit those three in particular, focus on the last one. And I just realized that I am not sharing my screen. So here's the agenda. All right, so I see quite a few familiar faces and quite a few familiar names. So for those who are coming back, big welcome back to you. And for those who are just hopping into AR, VR for training and education for the first time, big welcome to you. Excited to have you here. Quick background, our mission is to build a community of knowledge sharing. So our goal is to bridge the gap between industry experts, non-XR experts, and then XR experts. And then when we put them in the same virtual breakout room for the time being, what kind of conversations and what kind of learnings and teachings can we share? So ultimately, we're building a community of knowledge sharing. And how are we going to do that? Well, we have fireside chats, webinars, presentations, mostly presentations in this case, virtual breakout rooms, podcasts, networking events, which is what we'll have here. And then very soon, design and development jams as well. And if you're excited about what's going on in this group, and if you're excited about what you saw here today, we have more events coming down the pipeline. So we have one specializing in a much more niche subject, AR, VR for self-defense training, which is quite new. I mean, as if XR wasn't nascent enough, this particular area is quite unique. So we're excited to have Nelda Packing come and give a presentation in a few weeks. Shortly after, we're going to have a fireside chat with author and founder of Virtual Perceptions, Thomas Fisk, coming out of the UK. He's going to give us an overview of what it means to use XR for PR, and then other emerging business models and use cases as well. And then really exciting, on the 11th, November 11th, we're going to have an instructional designer from Tesla come, and he's going to give a presentation on immersive instructional design. So really exciting stuff coming down the pipeline. And if you meet somebody here today, and perhaps you didn't exchange information, you go ahead and drop your information in this contact list. So this contact list, it's a resource for you, for the community, and it's meant to facilitate ongoing relationships rather than only facilitating relationships within this 1 hour. So this contact list, and Andy, if you wouldn't mind dropping it in the chat, this contact list _XR for TE is just a Google sheet with contact information. And as always, we're very interested in getting feedback and hearing about different event ideas. So if you do have any kind of feedback or any kind of event ideas, do let us know in this bit.ly. Andy, again, I trust that you'll drop that in the link. And then the last bit here if you're interested in reaching out to us directly. Andy's and my email is at the bottom. In addition to our LinkedIn, we'd love to keep in touch. We'd love to continue the conversation. So feel free to drop us an invite on LinkedIn or shoot us a note. So with that said, Andy, let's dive into the routine here, man. I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Yeah, great. So my name is Andy. You've been listening to Tim there on the left. Give us the introduction, but my name is Andy. I'm on the right there. I'm the Director of Technology and the other co-founder at KairosXR. So what does KairosXR do? What are we about? We get really excited about training and education and how XR can provide really compelling solutions for those use cases. So you can see some of our work here in the center. But with that, I'll let Tim introduce himself.
Cool. I'm a Unity developer. I spent a lot of time building out XR at KairosXR. Like Andy said, co-founder as well. And for those, I see the participant number bumping up a little bit. Again, for those who are coming in a little late, unfortunately, we had a cancellation with our presentation, so we're pivoting, and we're still going to talk about best practices and those initial steps to get a job in XR. However, we're going to spend the rest of the time in virtual breakout rooms as well. So slight modification if you didn't get the Meetup or Eventbrite message. Cool. So we're going to dive into about 10 minutes of industry examples here. Why are we so excited about virtual reality and augmented reality, and why is the space such an exciting space for career transitioning or general career mobility? Well, we see it applicable in so many different areas, right? Especially in training and education, and granted, we are going to speak to training and education quite a bit here, but we do see, excuse me guys, I have a little bit of background noise. Just 1 minute. All right, I'm back. So we see the XR space expanding almost exponentially. That's because we have so many platforms coming out specific to training and education, whether it's crane operation training or disaster and emergency on-site training as well, as we see up here. But we also see on the soft skill side. And on the bottom right, we have an example of 360 video used for soft skills training. And all this is relevant because we're going to talk about what each workflow looks like, and then possibly where can you fit into each of these workflows, which roles are actually included in the pipeline to generate a 360 soft skills training, or Shell's immersive emergency training on the upper left. Looking at virtual reality examples, and on the left here, we have an augmented reality example as well, which is a very similar pipeline. For those who are unfamiliar with how to build virtual reality versus how to build augmented reality as well, fundamentally, the pipelines are the same. They're all using 3D engines. They're all using 3D modeling tools to actually create the assets. And then the last step is used to either create virtual reality or create an augmented reality experience. And it's effectively, how do you port the experience? How do you build the experience? And then which platform do you actually distribute it to? So we'll talk about a few key distinctions there in just a minute. But the goal here is to demonstrate how the workflows, or to speak to how the workflows are so similar, whether it's virtual reality or augmented reality. So unless you're an interaction designer, you don't necessarily need to specialize in just one. So let's start from the high level, and then we'll go into some more of the specifics. So we'll give you a wall of text here. So some of the steps to get started, and Andy, I'm going to pass it over to you in just a minute, so get ready. But the steps that we followed to get into XR was really understanding how XR was used in your industry. So if you come from AEC, if you come from healthcare, which companies are in healthcare and AEC, how are they using XR? And ultimately, where might you fit into that based on your existing skill sets? You don't need to learn programming to get into XR. You don't need to learn every bit of the pipeline to be an XR professional. Think about your skill sets and then build an immersive skill set on top of that. And then from there, understanding the XR landscape, which happens naturally. Of course, network. And then, of course, very similar to number 2 is learning the relevant tools. So 3ds Max, Blender, Maya, if you want to focus on the animation and the modeling or the art side of this, versus focusing on C#, or C++ if you're working in Unity or Unreal. And the last few steps here revolve around actually building. Whether you're a designer or a developer, it's important to get your hands dirty with these projects, so you understand on a deeper level what it means to design for AR, or what it means to design for virtual reality. Out of the gate, I didn't know any programming, didn't know a single bit of it, whereas Andy has a more technical background. But with that said, him and I both learned the tools that were relevant to those backgrounds. And Andy, I'm going to pass the mic over to you. If you give us a little bit of background on your journey in XR, I think that'd be quite illuminating.
Yeah, totally. And before I jump in, Tim, you're hitting on an excellent point that, we get a lot of questions around is, what if I don't have a technical background and I would like to get into a relatively technical field? How do I get started? So let us know in the chat if you do have a technical background or if you don't. And I would bet that there's probably a majority that don't have any technical background. And that's totally fine. And so right now I want to highlight some of the differences between Tim and myself and when we got started. So following these steps and, putting our narrative over these steps, I did have somewhat of a technical background. I studied physics and computer science in school, whereas Tim had a UX design background and a design background, and not as technical. The one thing that we both leaned on getting into the industry was our passion for teaching and instruction. So really determining the knowledge areas and skill sets that we had allowed us to focus on that XR landscape for those areas. Again, in our case, it was teaching and instruction. We then started to use Unity in my case, I used it as a teaching tool. And Tim did a very similar set of teaching tools at the beginning. But what he was focused on, what I was focused on was different. I came at it from more of a coding background. I was, creating functionality, whereas Tim focused on the design aspects and some of the tools that are low code or no code that allow you to really create a lot with, that design focus. Meanwhile, we were networking, going to events like this, finding everything that we could and, attending it. Following that networking, we were able to, use the tools that we were starting to learn. Again, Tim, being a non-technical beginner, started with the animation tool sets, right? Some of the existing kind of plug and play skills. And there are a lot of those out there. But he mastered those. He became a master of those tool sets and was able to provide value to projects. I came in again with a little bit more technical background and learned the tools that were relevant to me. So that, in my case, was more of a C#, learning how to code, learning how it was relevant for XR. And then, again, was providing value with my skill set. But at that point, once you get to step 6 here, you are really able to build a portfolio and build your resume. And that's critical. That's something you need to build yourself. And by building these projects, you're going to continue to learn. And by the end of step 7 or during step 7, when you're building that portfolio, you're going to understand the kind of the missing steps, right? The things that you don't know. In my case, it was learning some more of the design side, right? I didn't spend time on that up front. And in Tim's case, it was learning how to code. And at that point, it made sense for us to dive into the areas that we didn't know and spend the time learning those skills. But by the time you get to step 7, you're providing value. You are able to work on projects, consult, contract, do what you need to do to get work. So hopefully that provides some insight into the steps to get started, and then looking at the specific paths that both Tim and myself took to get started. Tim, is there anything you could add there?
Just one thing. For those who don't know what the process is to actually build XR, we are going to dive into that shortly. So when Andy mentions he learns the tools that are relevant to him, again, that's not all that helpful until you understand which tools are a part of the whole pipeline. So for those who still feel a little lost, don't worry, we're going to get there. Is the last thing I'd say.
Great, yeah, I'll jump into this one. So starting at the beginning, It's learning how XR is being used in your industry. So take a step back, assess where is your knowledge? Where's your expertise, right? Is that in AEC? Is it in healthcare, right? Go down the list. Again, in our case, it was training and instruction. And so as you can see here, one of the projects we worked on earlier on was an aerospace training and instruction program, teaching people about these models. They're able to interact with it in the VR space. But again, focus on that industry and see what others are doing in those industries, right? If you're looking at AEC, there's companies like the BIM Cube out there that are, really leading XR in that industry. Healthcare, OSO VR is an example that comes to mind. So focusing on those industries that are specific to you and understanding what products are out there in that industry and the companies that are creating those products.
All right. So Andy, do you want me to hop into these? Then I'll pass it back to you. Right
Yeah,
after.
why don't you take it away, and I'll kind of chime in if there's stuff to add.
Awesome. So we just talked about the high level strategy. We just talked about the importance of understanding the tool sets and then the workflows that are relevant to your skill set. But what exactly does that mean if we don't know what the pipeline is? We're going to talk about 4 key areas here: 360 video, XR design, XR development, and then we're going to finish up with XR research. And XR research actually embodies product management, but also UX research as well. Those categories are just for the sake of this presentation. It's really much more nuanced than that, but we found that those are 4 key distinctions with very similar skill sets that can lend themselves as helpful as you're navigating and trying to figure out which areas are right for you. So general overview, 360, again, 360 is very hardware centric. So typically it involves some kind of 360 camera. As you can see on the left here, you may be hired to go out to a site. And again, a key distinction there, 360 versus virtual reality. 360, you have this 2D image or 2D video plastered around you in all directions versus virtual reality where you have these 3D models around you. So if 360 video involves hardware, you're hired to go out to a site and capture a video just like you would with a normal camera to get that shot. Once you capture that video, you process it and you edit it. You stitch it together or automatically stitches it, which is a term used to seal the sides effectively of the camera shot. And then you pull it into Unity, which is what we see on the right here. So once it's edited, actually, I don't think this is, yeah, it's definitely not Unity. This is an editing software. Excuse me, I misspoke. However, once you do capture the images, or for instance, in this case, it's photogrammetry, then you can pull the rendering into Unity or a 3D engine and then deploy it onto a headset, which is how you actually see it in its final form in a VR headset. But that's the 360 workflow where you have a 360 camera. If you like cameras, that's great. But what about if you want to create 3D models? What if you're a more artistic type and you enjoy the self-expression that comes from environment design, lighting design, 3D modeling as well? You prefer to work in a tool like Maya or 3ds Max. There's a whole area for environment design and the artist workflow and the artist world. So XR design may be creating 3D assets. And in that case, like I said, you would be creating environments, you'd be creating 3D models from trees to cars, building up the scene. But as of recently, more and more companies are starting to use virtual reality design tools. In this case, we have Gravity Sketch, which was originally used as a tool both for automotive and shoe design, of all things. But Ford, for instance, Ford partners with, I don't think this is Ford in this case, but Ford did partner with Gravity Sketch to bake Gravity Sketch into the workflow. So you start to see, if you don't want to learn 3ds Max or Maya, you can start using these virtual reality tools and generate some really high quality 3D models as well. So in the design world, you may focus on 3D modeling, you may focus on animation, you may focus on UI design as well. But then how do you actually add functionality to virtual reality? And that's where the world of VR development and AR development, or just across the board, XR developer comes into play. You'll be working in Unity, or you'll be working in Unreal as well. Both tools You could be working in Amazon Sumerian. You could also be working, say, in Metaverse. There are other 3D engines out there. But if you are an XR developer, chances are you're going to work in either Unreal or Unity. If you're working in Unity, you need to learn C#. C# is the primary programming language, whereas Unreal uses C++. Unity has a larger community behind it, primarily because Unity, or rather C# is a little more accessible to learn. Unity earlier on also invested considerable resources into building that community. So you'll find that the forums may be more stacked when it comes to learning Unity. But either way, you should be thinking about what your day-to-day is going to look like. Do you want to be building out code? Do you want to be building out interactions? Or would you prefer to focus on a more visual workflow in the 3D art world? As an aside, Unity does have certifications for both. So if you're looking to get a badge of approval or an industry standard, look into Unity certifications. We actually we co-wrote or contributed to the writing of the expert certification exam. So if anybody has any questions around the certifications, we're happy to follow up afterwards. So let's talk about process really quick. We just spoke to 360, we just spoke to design, and we spoke to development. But again, it's hard to figure out where you fit into the workflow if you don't know what the full process is. And how do you know what the full process is unless you've worked on these XR projects before? So given that we spend the majority of our time thinking about what XR means for instructional design and for training projects as well, it's important to start with a 3-step process that we follow literally every single project. First, it's the project planning and the project design. Then it's the development, building out the immersive interactive application, and then it's the actual rollout. And within that, you may see several roles that are repeating, but also several distinct roles. So I'm going to go over each of these roles and ask yourself what resonates with you. What kind of skill set do you have, and do you think that this would make sense for you? And then next, we're going to talk about how do you actually get those jobs. So XR subject matter expert. Again, you understand what the XR workflow is. You may be a product manager. You understand the full pipeline from generating the assets to generating the creative vision to managing the project, managing the development team as well, and then of course rolling out as well. But either way, you have a technical subject matter expert that understands what it means to build an XR application. Project management. There's so many moving parts. I mean, just like how the gaming industry is so complicated. There are hundreds of people working on a single game, thousands of people maybe. Perhaps XR is not at that scale, but the project management strategies are still very consistent given that we're using game tools or game design and game development tools. And then of course, instructional designer. What does immersive instructional design actually mean? Do you have the creative wherewithal and the creative vision to come up with the games, come up with the exercises, the activities, so that when somebody puts on a headset or is interacting with an augmented reality simulation on their phones, what kind of activities are they using to learn more efficiently? Those are all roles perhaps outside of the independent software vendor or ISV or the development team, right? Sure, the project manager may be directly involved with the development team, but those are 3 areas that you can focus on where there are plenty of jobs and you don't need to actually learn Unity and learn any kind of development. If you're planning on not necessarily leaving your job, you're just observing XR from afar, you could be the internal champion that's needed in every one of the XR projects, bringing XR into your team. Or you could be one of the 360 video producers. You could be a designer. You could be a developer on the development team. Or as I mentioned, instructional designer. But lastly, we have these 3 areas here, the IT team, the UX researcher, and of course the instructional designer once again. And this is a part of the rollout. So how do you actually roll out? What resources are needed to roll out XR in your organization? Well, again, the IT team needs to manage the headsets. They need to understand what it means to manage these headsets. A UX researcher is going to be responsible for measuring efficacy. Does the application or solution actually work, right? Are the interactions acceptable? Is the NPS score dropping, or the net promoter score is at an acceptable level? Do users feel confident coming out of the application or the training simulation? So the UX researcher is absolutely core to these analytic systems in figuring out what future changes are needed. So again, these are all different areas that don't necessarily only revolve around design and development. And if you're interested in getting into XR, certainly consider one of these handful of roles. So we're going to sum all of that up. You should know the industry landscape, who are the main players, what hardware is available, and what software is available. Relatively straightforward stuff, certainly not all that breakthrough. But let's go ahead and talk about it. Let's talk about it in groups before we come back to some of these industry resources. So our favorite part of this is getting together and actually meeting the other people in these sessions. We're going to get into virtual breakout rooms and talk about what each other's goals are and what they're hoping to get out of these events as well. And we're going to give you a prompt, and we're going to meet for about 5 to 10 minutes. Then we're going to reconvene. We're going to talk about it for a little bit, and then we're going to finish up the presentation here. So we're taking a little break in the presentation. So again, we're going to get into breakout rooms and chat for about 10 minutes, get to know each other, give yourself an introduction. And then once you introduce yourself, think about a training scenario that would benefit from XR, either at your company or your favorite use cases. So what are some of the specific learning objectives that you would need to accomplish if you are building out this XR application? And then why would you use virtual reality, or consider why you would use augmented reality versus virtual reality to accomplish those learning objectives. So we're going to give this a try, and then we're going to come back together and we're going to finish up the presentation. And you guys should all have invites now. All right. All right, so a few really positive indicators there. We typically know that the virtual breakout rooms are going well when I hit the close button and like nobody comes back until like 15 seconds. So this is good. That's a really that's a really good sign. And exciting stuff, guys. We also have a little polling feature here. So I wanted to gut check with everybody, and just want to gut check on this. On the breakout rooms to get everybody's take. Do we prefer presentations? Do we prefer breakout rooms? This will help us ultimately adjust for future sessions. All right, so let's go ahead and dive back in. So let's go back to a few of these resources before we went into our breakout rooms. So where we are in our process, in our journey of breaking into XR. Well, we know that we need to focus on industry expertise. So if we come from something like nuclear energy or just renewables across the board. The first step, of course, is to focus on how XR is in renewables. And again, figure out who the main players are and what kind of projects and research is being done. Then, of course, finding your skill set. Are you a designer? Are you more technical? Do you know programming languages? Are you interested in coding? Or are you more interested in building out high fidelity environments? Or perhaps just capturing 360 footage. So all that will inform the roles and the skill sets that you should focus on to figure out where you fall into the pipeline, the workflow. But now we arrive at getting a wider industry understanding. What's going on across the entire XR space? Many people start by trying to figure out the entire XR space, but it's too vast. It doesn't make sense. It makes sense to start specialized, and then as time goes on, then you can continue to explore. And some really helpful resources here are some of the XR directories. Andy and I didn't know this for a while, but it turns out that there are some XR directories that literally have almost every XR startup and then larger companies and businesses as well. A few of them XR collaboration, XR directory, and there are a few awesome Trello boards as well, such as the Trello augmented reality industry and then Trello virtual reality industry, and then another site, virtual reality marketing. All of these directories are set up both for business development strategy, but also job seekers as well. So again, you have your skill set, you have your own industry of expertise. Now, as you continue to expand and learn more about the XR space, lean into these directories to figure out what startups are doing what, whether you're building a product yourself or interested in the consulting or a salaried position. Andy and I will send out a few links after this as well, so you have those. But in the meantime, feel free just to Google those and you'll find them. We have like 50 of them. So there's a lot for you to read and check out. Another strategy as well, again, now that you're starting to get a better idea of what the full process is, again, if we think of that 3-step process, it's project planning and design and development, and then rollout, research and analytics, right? So if we think of the 3 steps, if that's our general framework, how do you then find some of the other companies that may be hiring? Which companies are doing better than others? And our first, rather than Google searching, our first step is to always think about or evaluate what's on Oculus or Steam. Those are the two biggest stores for XR content, and typically give a pretty good read just based on the customer feedback and who's really responsive in the comments and engaging in the community as well. Who's investing the most seriously in their XR content and who's doing particularly well. So check out Oculus and Steam to get the lay of the land around XR teams that have stored content. And then, of course, lean into the Google search and the XR directories. And lastly, there are quite a few newsletters in XR, if you in job boards as well. If you just Google search XR jobs boards, VR jobs boards, job boards, not jobs boards. Anyways, there's so many resources just dedicated to either tutorials or existing jobs, such as virtual reality marketing, to connect you with an independent software vendor, or there's My XR Jobs, which of course we sadly cannot have a presentation from today, but they are a web page dedicated only to XR jobs. So these resources do exist. Again, in a few weeks, we're going to have virtual perception. Thomas Fisk he runs the Immersive Wire, which is another great newsletter. So sign up for those newsletters. They typically always have job sections. So this is actually miscellaneously placed. This is supposed to be before our first breakout room. So the idea here is for us to think about the creative side of XR. So again, we're focusing on XR design, but instructional design as well. And in this case, the activity would be which instructional design patterns, which game mechanics would be most conducive. And again, we want you to think about what design problems we're thinking about so that you can think about, okay, well, am I more interested in actually building the product and figuring out how everything works, or why everything works together? So that's the key differentiation between development and design. On the right here, we have a few products that we worked on. One is a physical therapy on the bottom, and the upper right, obviously, is an automotive configurator, desktop in this case, rather than only virtual reality, but it is multiplayer. So again, we lean on the emerging design patterns coming out of the Oculus store and the Steam store. Which games are the most successful? Which game mechanics have certain techniques that we can apply to instructional design? And then the last bit here, I promise you that there were four sections, but the last section here is XR research. In the full pipeline, referring to the 360 design development, and of course, XR research. Well, what's the goal of XR research, first of all? Well, to find bugs, right? Are there bugs? Are there user bugs? Can all the users accomplish what they need to accomplish? Are there software bugs in this case? And then, of course, figuring out, getting data around what's going well and what isn't going well, even more important. And then, of course, consulting with the development team to adjust as needed. So these are all some of the key goals within the XR research process on the evaluative side, rather than only focusing on the generative side in the beginning of the project. A few questions that we always ask. Net Promoter Score, are you likely to recommend this? Points of frustration, when were you most frustrated in the application? Points of elation, which features in particular did you really enjoy? And then additional user abilities. This is something that I could continue to talk about for hours, given that my background is in UX research within UX design. So certainly really interesting stuff, applying scientific method. But again, XR research is a really, really deep field. And it's not just about focusing on the efficacy and collecting data around the efficacy of XR, but also very much involved in the design process as well. Some of the common tools that we learn aren't necessarily XR specific tools. We use SurveyMonkey, HubSpot, Typeform as just a few examples there. But really, XR is no different. The myth we're trying to debunk here is that XR is no different in terms of the design and development process than so many other bits of software and types of software, from web to mobile to games, for instance. We're using the same tools across the board. So if you were to look at UX design and figure out which are the leading tools, for instance, Figma is now a leading design tool. Well, we use Figma every single day when we're building out UI for virtual reality. So again, the tools are used across these different mediums. So then the last bit is you've built your skill set, you know where you're going to plug in, but how do you actually get that job? Well, yes, you could cold apply. Undoubtedly, you could cold apply and you can continue to work on your portfolio, which is very, very important. But at the end of the day, you do need to build that network. And you can either do so if we look at a few of the methods at the bottom, with design jams and hackathons. Design jams and hackathons may be intimidating in the beginning, but really everybody's intimidated unless you're like a career hackathoner. Everybody feels intimidated and nervous when they go to these hackathons and design jams. So it's important that you get there so you start understanding the process and meet other people rather than being a core part of the team. Realistically, in the beginning, early days of a hackathon, you may not be absolutely centric unless you have a very strong skill set, and that's okay. And that's the expectation that everybody has coming into it. Game nights, happy hours, we love the game nights. Andy and I both got into XR by going to these game nights where people are, they have different event themes around a particular type of virtual reality experience, for instance. The workshops, in-person workshops are really great for skill cultivation, but we would say that the biggest benefit is, again, that network. If you spend a weekend with somebody working in the trenches on these development problems or design problems, again, you build a strong relationship, and that's ultimately why the workshops are worth what they're worth. It's not necessarily only about the skill sets, given that YouTube has an infinite number of tutorials on Unity. Unity has the Unity Learn platform. There's no end to learning resources. So it's really about building professional contacts in the industry.
Yeah, I'd also add to this slide, Tim, that as you are building that XR expertise in your industry, don't only focus on XR events, right? Focus on your other industry events. As you learn XR and you go to your own industry events, you will become the resident expert, right? No one else is going to know as much XR as you, or maybe you'll find those people as well, but don't only focus on XR, right? Focus on that industry and make sure you're taking that industry sliver and becoming the name, right? When someone thinks of AEC and XR, you want to be that name that they think of, or whatever your industry is in XR.
Totally. All right, we hope that was thought-provoking. We are going to go into another round of virtual breakout rooms, given that we have about 15 minutes left here. And again, the big takeaway here is meet other people in the industry. You never know when you're going to be able to collaborate in the future. So let's go ahead and let's do just that. Before we do so, quick reminder, we have additional events coming up. So usually we have an industry speaker here rather than you guys just listening to Andy and I blabber on. So we will have, again, Nella Packing who specializes in XR training for self-defense coming in a few weeks. Then a week after that, we'll have Virtual Perceptions, Thomas Fisk. And then a week after that, we'll have Tesla, Thomas Cower, who's an instructional designer there. So really, really exciting stuff coming down the pipeline. Again, would love to hear from you if you have any feedback. And certainly if you'd like to stay in touch, you can drop your name in our contact list. Reach out to anybody else there if you're interested in connecting, or just reach out to Andy and I directly. Now, we should say we are recording this event, and we will be releasing in the next few days. We will be releasing this. We have a bunch of videos actually from all of the events that we're going to be releasing sometime in the next week or so. But this one is going to be the first one that we release, given that it is the freshest. So there's that, and we also have a connection program that we're standing up. So if you are interested in meeting one-on-one with individuals in this Meetup community, we will be rolling that out. So if you check out the description in our Meetup, you'll find the sign-up form for that connection program. So at any rate, let's go ahead and break into our virtual breakout rooms. So instructional design, again, we get so excited about instructional design and education in XR. So let's think about just that. Let's think about immersive activities. And what's an immersive activity that would teach a learning objective that comes to mind? In other words, what's a topic or a learning concept that you would like to teach in XR? What's the learning objective, and then which XR activity would be particularly conducive to teach that learning objective or accomplish that learning objective? So I'm going to go ahead and hit our breakout room button. That's just food for thought. If that excites you, fantastic. If it doesn't, we talk about something else.